Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast, your ticket to all things college football. Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? Join us as we talk college football from the national championship to college rivalries to bowl games to the Heisman Trophy to which conference is the best. We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between.
Welcome to the GSMC College Football Podcast on the GSMC Podcast Network. I am their host that you hear on Mondays, Ethan here, and we have football to talk about, man. Football is back, and it was refreshing to see, man. I was really excited to get into some games, even if they weren't the best competition around. It was interesting to see just how they would play out, just to see the environment, the atmosphere, the no fans, the some fans, how they were going to do the broadcast. It was all really, really entertaining, man. It was really entertaining. So, we're going to have to get involved with what we ended up watching, but also we got to talk about the week 1 to week 2 ramifications on things. We have a lot to go over. But first I got to talk about the atmosphere, man. I watched a few of the games. Of course, I watched Texas State versus SMU. I watched some Memphis football for the first time in a few years, really. I don't really stay in tuned with Memphis, but I watched Memphis versus Arkansas State, and then, of course, most people tuned in for the Army game, but, of course, it wasn't the greatest thing to sit there and watch. And then Southern Miss versus South Alabama was interesting, particularly because of the environment it was played in. 10,000 fans, night game, or evening game, kind of. And it was really something to see as far as how people were going to, I guess, react being low-key socially distanced. And at the same time, there's a lot of fans in there for lack of a better phrase, a lot of fans in there, man. So I think first things first, we have to say the football was okay across the board. Right, it wasn't great, and I wasn't expecting, some top-tier national championship level football, but there was a lot of things that you could obviously identify to having a weird offseason. One, defensive coverages and just overall defensive awareness going on mid-game for majority of the games that I watched were basically playing at half speed, while the offense was not playing at full speed either, but it looked like the offenses were getting the better of some teams only because of just the schemes that they were running. So like the Army-Navy game was interesting because, I'm sorry, not the Army-Navy game, but the Army-Middle Tennessee State game was interesting, particularly because of the fact that Army runs a triple option and Middle Tennessee didn't know what to do with it. There was a possession where for 12 straight minutes, Army ran the ball and they did not throw a pass. For 12 minutes, right down the field, like 90 yards, did not throw a pass the whole possession, the whole time. That's insane, right? And they drove down the field and did that. And I think that a lot of these teams that we're going to see next week too, as we're going to get some bigger games going on and some bigger teams, some bigger notable teams that are going to play, we're going to see some defensive lapses. We're going to see guys look like they're still trying to get the system. They're still trying to get back in game shape. Not to say they're out of shape, but, playing on a game or playing in a game scenario is a lot different than scripting in practice. And considering that there was not so much going on is a very significant thing because at the end of the day, everybody didn't get to practice too much. And that can be something that is going to be a talking point during the first few games of the season as teams are trying to get under their legs. We saw last year when Clemson was getting started, they didn't look all the way together and with a full season of practice. So I can't imagine how teams are going to come out and look, this coming year with all this craziness going on. Like 2020 is going to be an interesting football year, not only for the pros, but for colleges, because we're going to see just who prepared the best way possible, who had too many setbacks going in early, really May to, all the way to August, who had the most setbacks, whose setbacks were really detrimental to what they needed to get done as a team and as a unit. And also we're going to see just how some of these guys have to step up as some of their teammates or whoever it might be who have stepped down and chosen to not play this season inside these conferences that are still playing college football. So we're going to see a lot going on so far. So yeah, the first thing for sure, defense it's going to be a struggle for a lot of teams. And a lot of teams that do predicate on defense, I still expect to see some good plays, some good things. Like, this is not to say that it's going to be a barn burner of games across the board. Like, we saw that they weren't necessarily barn burners all the way through. But you're just going to see some common mistakes, some bad coverages, some miscommunications, some bad tackling. You're just going to see it. And it's only natural that it's going to happen at the smaller schools or at the lower levels of college football, and it will hopefully mitigate itself at the higher levels of Division I and in the Power 5, but you never really know. So it's just something to be mentally prepped for. Another thing on our radar is about TCU versus SMU. So SMU did play already, right? So they played, they won their game, which was a pretty good game. We'll talk about it a little bit later. But the September 11th season opener between TCU and SMU was postponed after some positive test results within the TCU program, the school announced in a statement. So the results came from athletes as well as members of the support staff, TCU athletic director Jeremiah Donati. So he said, the two schools will monitor open dates throughout the season to potentially make up the game. So in the course of the following CDC guidelines and our aggressive testing and contact tracing strategy, we discovered that some student athletes and support staff in our football program have tested positive for COVID-19. The statement read, those individuals who were notified immediately and are currently abiding by CDC protocols. The game against SMU was set to be TCU's lone non-conference game at the start of the season, and the Horned Frogs' remaining schedule includes 9 games against the Big 12 opponents in 11 weeks. SMU opens the season Saturday against Texas State. The other two teams do not share a bye week for the remainder of the season until December 12th, if neither is in their respective conference title games. So no one is currently facing serious health issues, and we intend to continue our enforcement on the strict standards to protect the program and our community. Everyone's health and safety remains our top priority. We share in your disappointment, but firmly believe that we will be ready to resume football activities soon. We will continue to follow prevention and testing protocols and look forward to the Big 12 conference opener against Iowa State on September 26th. So that's some big time things going on, man. Another thing we have to look at and reconsider is just how many people are actually opting out. So LSU had a barrage of defensive players opt out in the beginning part of last week, and it was quite a surprise number as when you think about just what LSU has to go through now. So for 5 months this off season, the assumption was LSU's defense was due for a change in philosophy because of the unbelievable depth that the Tigers had up front. And it's the big reason for why Coach Ed Orgeron wanted to make the switch to the 4-3 defense. At times this offseason, Ed Orgeron said that the Tigers could go 4 deep at every position along the defensive line. Those days are long gone, though, as of last month has produced gut punch after gut punch to what was once considered the deepest position group on the roster. That being the defensive line, of course. So First, there was senior defensive end Neil Farrell announcing that he would opt out of the 2020 season due to the COVID-19 related issues. Then came Orgeron's announcement that defensive end Justin Thomas would be leaving the program, later transferring to UAB. And all of that came to a head on Monday when it was reported that defensive end TK McLendon would be entering the transfer portal and junior defensive tackle Tyler Shelvin would be opting out of the season. So that makes 4 players that at one point or another Orgeron called a starter this off season and who are all now off the 2020 team. So the only returning starter who will receive significant playing time was senior Glenn Logan, who recorded 20 tackles as a junior in 2019. LSU has a phenomenal job on their hands, and they've done a pretty good one in recruiting trail, and now we'll be asking to do having some younger people on the roster to step up with the loss of veteran players. Orgeron said last week in a Zoom call that he's been impressed with seniors Andre Anthony and Travis Moore, calling them both starters at defensive end. He says, I really like Andre. I like the work he's doing, and Travis Moore is starting at left and right, or left end right now, and it's Travis' senior year, and he's done a good job. JUCO transfer Ali Gay is behind Moore and will likely see a ton of work throughout the season, even if he doesn't start right away. Gay is listed as 6'6", 265 pounds, and has been mentioned by Orgeron on more than one occasion since the start of fall camp. But the true standout on the outside has been freshman pass rusher BJ Ojulari, who is Orgeron believes could be one day an All-American for the purple and gold. So yesterday they said he had 4 or 5 sacks, and said in the Zoom call last week, you're going to see him on third down and definitely considered a starter in the rotation. Philip Webb is doing well as well, and those guys are looking pretty good. So not much has changed on the outside where things stood 2 weeks ago, but with the departure of Shelvin, the interior defensive line is a totally different story. What made Shelvin a special player was his ability to produce double and triple teams, giving his teammates more opportunities, to get out, get some tackles for loss, some sacks, what have you. And it's a unique skill set that's hard to replicate. On the inside, Saki Apu Ika figures to be the prime beneficiary with Shelvin's departure. Ika is a 6'4", 340-pound sophomore who drew rave reviews as a freshman but did not see the field much. Logan will have one of the starting spots locked inside, and Ika will be given early opportunity to earn the other interior spot. A pair of freshmen have also stood out on the interior in Jaquelin Roy and Jacobian Gullery. So Roy and Gullery were 2 big defensive line signees from the 2020 class and have shown coaching staff a lot since arriving on campus in June. Roy is a 6'3", 300-pound guy, and I'll tell you a guy that comes on hand to football school is Eric Taylor. He's a very, very talented young man, Orgeron said to ESPN Baton Rouge last month, and Eric's 6'4", 292. Jacobian Gullery is 6'1", but he's 337. So they all come in all sizes. But athletic ability, they think the 3 of those guys with defenses are phenomenal players. So the depth on the defensive line will ultimately be determined by how much of an impact the freshmen can have. Orgeron said during the preseason Zoom call with the media that he thinks that the defensive line will be a strength of the team, but there's no doubt that the depth has taken a hit since those comments. And Orgeron says, I think that the defensive line, we have a lot of depth that we can rotate these guys, and he does believe that having a 4-3 defense and how we will attack. So I can't say enough about Coach Bo Pelini and what he has brought to the table. And he knows that he knows the defense in and out, and he knows what he wants out of it. He's an aggressive coach, but he's a player's coach, and they love him. So LSU is going to have a bit of a makeover when it comes to defense alongside everything else. So that's why they keep dropping in the polls, man. These rankings have LSU going farther and farther and farther. And at this point, it's like they sacrificed so much to win their national championship, because now, instead of looking forward to a potential dynasty situation, which basically railroaded basically after the national championship, because there's so many players that declared to the draft. Of course, we know about Joe Brady. We know about, Armada leaving as well. And now all of this, like COVID-19 came in, and just started wrecking havoc everywhere it had a chance to. And that's the sad reality of this whole thing, man. It's just, you would love to see a national champion be able to defend its title at full strength, and it's just not going to be the case no matter where you look at it. And that's a little bit upsetting. It's a little bit disappointing. But at the same time, this isn't anything that we didn't know going in outside of the COVID, cop-outs or opt-outs. I don't want to say cop-outs. That sounds rude. But the opt-outs, we didn't know about those coming, but we knew it could happen. It's just you wouldn't have thought that a SEC school would have so many. And, another SEC school that just had one real quick was Georgia, where we saw one of their quarterbacks, Jamie Newman, he decided to opt out himself. So across the board, we're seeing a lot of guys making personal decisions, making business decisions, or executive decisions, maybe you want to call it, from Kevin Hart's old comedy specials around their teams. So yeah, man, college football is back and we're still dealing with COVID. So we're about to take our first break, and then coming back, we're going to cover some more about rankings, man. We got to look what's to come out of week 1 and what the rankings mean. GSMC.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Okay, so we're back, GSMC College Football Nation. And we are talking about rankings now, man. We got to get into the rankings. First week of college football, we have no choice but to get it in and get it in strong and solid. So, of course, not a lot of the big name, top 25 teams in the nation played yesterday, but there was one team in particular that did play that had some implications. So Memphis played and they won. So that does have some minor significance to the rankings that we're about to get into. But so ESPN has this list out, and we're just going to follow through and see what we're seeing. So, the SEC bias is going to be there. Of course, 6 of the top 10 teams of this week's rankings are from the SEC, and they begin playing September 26th with a 10-game league-only season. So whatever it's worth, an SEC team will either win the national championship or played in the national, or they've won it, or they've played in the national championship game 13 at the last 14 seasons. So that includes 5 different SEC teams. So number 1 in the rankings is Alabama. So by their standards, it's been an eternity since the Crimson Tide last won a national championship all the way back in 2017. And yeah, that's pretty crazy to think about that. That's a long stretch for Alabama. Alabama's been on a tear for the better half of the last decade, and it's been a minute. So, but we know that they're always one of the best, if not the best coached, best ran football organizations in college football. So we learned last season that it's possible to have a playoff without the Crimson Tide, and don't look for that to become a trend. So several key players in the NFL's radar returned to school, including Devonta Smith, offensive tackle Alex Leatherwood, and there hasn't been any opt-outs for Alabama. So with a healthy Dylan Moses back in the middle linebacker, the defense should also be much closer to what we are used to seeing from Alabama underneath Nick Saban. Number 2 should be of no surprise, is that it's the Clemson Tigers. So the combination of Trevor Lawrence and Travis Etienne, being in the backfield, not to mention an always talented receiver core, means that beating the Tigers this season is going to take a team that can put up points in bunches. Of course, Rarely does that happen to a Brent Venables coach defense, and Clemson has either won national championship or played in the national championship game 4 of the last 5 years. The Tigers have everything it takes to be right back there this season. So they play Wake Forest this coming Saturday at 7:30 on ABC. That is definitely going to be a game that we all need to tune into. Alabama plays Missouri September 26th on ESPN at 7 p.m. Number 3 is Georgia. So the Bulldogs, the biggest win of the offseason for Georgia might have been to get USC's transfer quarterback JT Daniels, getting a waiver from the NCAA to be eligible to play right away this season, especially with Wake Forest graduate transfer Jamie Newman announcing this week that he was opting out of the season as he was recovering from a torn ACL a year ago and has been cleared medically for contact, but he has plenty of game. And with a deep, fast, and talented Georgia squad, the Dogs should be in the middle of the national championship conversation like they always are. Hopefully they can figure some things out. They play Arkansas week 1, September 26th, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, SEC Network. Number 4 is the Florida Gators. So the Gators have basically jumped up quite a bit in rankings because of so many people being off the rankings list due to the Big Ten and the Pac-12 opting out of a season this year. Georgia isn't the only SEC school in the Eastern Division that has a big aspirations this season. Florida has a chance to be just as good or maybe even better, especially if redshirt junior quarterback Kyle Trask makes the kind of jump that most people have in mind that he's able to do. So this will be his 3rd season under Dan Mullen, who knows a thing or two about developing quarterbacks. Todd Gratham is one of college football's best defensive coordinators, and the Gators have been masterful at playing pressure defense on his watch. They play Ole Miss September 26th at noon on ESPN. So remember, I'm pretty sure the SEC has this ESPN thing going on right now, and it's going to be really, really fantastic for them in particular. But number 5 is the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. So we get some ACC action here. Second ACC team on the board so far. And they have joined the conference, at least for this season alone. The Irish will play a full 10 slate ACC games, and they'll be eligible to play in the conference championship in December. So they have the pieces in place to get there as well. So from veteran quarterback Ian Book, and is one of the top offensive lines in the country, to budding superstars on defense on linebacker Jeremiah Ozua Kunaruma and safety Kyle Hamilton. So this team is primed to win 10 or more games for the 4th straight season, and apologizes to Jeremiah if I butchered your last name. I tried my best. But they play Duke Saturday at 2:30 on NBC. So that's going to be one of those games where this is the hardest thing, right? When there's so many good games starting to come out now, it's going to be tough to decide which ones to watch. Oklahoma Sooners are 6th. So there's a new quarterback in charge in Norman, but has a quarterback ever been an issue for Lincoln Riley, right? Not really ever. So redshirt freshman Spencer Rattler has been named the starter, and that's big news. And even though he won't have CeeDee Lamb to throw to this season, the Sooners will again be an offensive juggernaut, I would assume. And with Alan Grinch back for his 2nd season as defensive coordinator, the Sooners will be even better on that side of the ball with 8 starters returning, and that's a big deal. Now, we all know that Oklahoma is known for their passing proficiencies and prolific playmaking on the offensive end, but their defense can sometimes be a bit of a struggle. And when they play a really good offensive team and they get behind and they have to play from behind, it can be really bad. But we have to give the benefit of the doubt to Lincoln Riley. He's one of the better coaches in college football, and he always has this team prepared to get to the big dance. So they play Missouri State this Saturday at 7 p.m. and it's a pay-per-view. So I'm pretty sure it's going to be the Big 12 Network. Number 7 is LSU. So LSU we just talked about them, right? So Ed Orgeron is confident that the Tigers have recruited well over the past few years, and they're going to find out just how well this season, of course. So the defending national championship national champions lost a ton of players to the NFL draft, and more recently several others have opted out of the season over COVID-19 concerns, including Jamar Chase, someone we didn't even talk about because we were so concerned with the defense. So Jamar Chase opted out, Tyler Shelvin opted out, and the Tigers will shift to a 4-3 on defense under new coordinator Bo Pelini, and he can't wait to turn transfer linebacker Jabril Cox loose in a new system. So LSU is going to play Mississippi State September 26th on CBS, where they usually play a lot. But LSU is going to have a lot to prove, but I think they're going to have a lot of pride. They may have that Toronto Raptors syndrome in them, where they just don't want to lay down, man. They want to be able to come out and showcase just what they're made of as a team and as a squadron. And that's always something to, keep in mind. So as we move along here, number 8 is Texas A&M. So Texas A&M doled out $75 million to get Jimbo Fisher away from Florida State, and the Aggies were hoping for immediate returns. And the third season might not qualify as immediate, but Texas A&M is positioned to make a major move in 2020 with just about all of its key players from a year ago back to play. Paramount will be senior quarterback Kellen Mond throwing the ball with more consistency, but he has talented players around him this time around, and it didn't help that the Aggies on defense, that senior cornerback Elijah Blaze decided to opt out though. So it's not really that great, but I would assume that Jimbo will have them ready to at least compete out there, and they made strides each year in and year out. So it only seems like it's best to trend upwards at this point. They play Vanderbilt September 26th on the SEC Network. Texas Longhorns at 9. So nobody in Austin needs to be reminded how long it's been since Texas won a Big 12 championship. It was 2009. The same year the Longhorns lost to Alabama in the national championship game. Tommy Herman is now in his 4th season as a coach and a 10-win season and a Sugar Bowl victory to cap off 2018. The Texas dipped into 8 wins a year ago, and there's nothing like having experience at quarterback, and Sam Ehlinger returning for his senior season is huge. He's tough as they come, and he'll need consistent play around him if Texas is going to unseat Oklahoma in the Big 12. They play UTEP Saturday, 8 p.m. on the Longhorn Network. Number 10 on his list is Auburn, the team that I am most excited to see because they have a lot of potential to make some things happen. They've managed to beat Alabama 2 of the past 3 years, but the frustrating part is for folks on the plains is that the Tigers don't have any SEC championships or college football playoff appearances to show for it. Sophomore quarterback Bo Nix should prosper with Chad Morris coming over as offensive coordinator, and even with some key losses on the defensive line, Kevin Steele will again have Auburn's defense ready to go. And they play Kentucky September 26th, noon Eastern time on the SEC Network. Number 11 is Oklahoma State. So the Cowboys are prepped and ready to have one of the better seasons in their slot. At least that's what they thought, because before COVID, we had assumed that Chuba Hubbard was a guy that was kind of underrated. People weren't really paying attention to him, but people started to see it. Oh yeah, this guy's really good. And then he started speaking out and people started to pay attention. You know all about their coach. He has said some things in the past few months that have not really resonated well, but it wasn't the smoothest off season. So this fall, he has a chance to be a lot more fun in Stillwater. So running back Chuba Hubbard and wide receiver Tylan Wallace combined to give the Cowboys one of the best 1-2 punches in the country. And quarterback Spencer Sanders should improve after a solid freshman season. The offensive line will have some new faces, and the defense with one of their stud linebackers that they really will need to depend on, and one of the more underrated players in the country after racking up 15.5 tackles for loss last season in a mend. So they play Tulsa Saturday at 7:30 p.m. on ESPNU. Number 12 is Cincinnati. So the Bearcats, the top group of 5 team in the power rankings. Cincinnati has won 11 games in each of the last 2 seasons. Luke Fickell entering the 4th season as a coach. You know, he's done a wonderful job. He's a guy that a lot of people are probably going to try and snag for the NFL soon if he keeps this up. And he's a guy who basically said that he's staying there for remainder of the near future, at least. The Bearcats returned 16 of their 22 starters, which includes 13 of the team's top 25 tacklers from a year ago. The best news for Cincinnati is that Memphis has to come to Nippert Stadium this season, and Memphis was the only AAC team to beat Cincinnati a year ago and did it twice, both in Memphis. They play Austin Peay September 19th on ESPN at noon. Number 13 is Iowa State. So the Cyclones, Matt Campbell, who has been on more than one of few short lists for coaching searches, is back for his 5th season in Iowa State's coach. And he has the quarterback in Brock Purdy, who gives opposing defensive coordinators fits. Purdy has 4,231 yards of total offense as a sophomore and accounted for 35 touchdowns. Campbell also has one of the best tight ends in the country in Charlie Kohler. And defensively, the Cyclones' strength will be at linebacker, and secondary defensive end Taquan Bailey will also be a key. He missed most of last season with an ankle injury, but had 8 sacks in 2018. Then they play Louisiana this Saturday at noon on ESPN. Number 14 is Tennessee. So after disastrous start a year ago, the Vols rallied to win 7 of their last 8 games in Jeremy Pruitt's 2nd season as coach. The strength of this team should be on the offensive line, especially Trey Smith back at guard, and there's always a good place to start in the SEC. Redshirt sophomore or senior quarterback Jared Garantino has had his ups and downs, but battled his way to being one of the team's best leaders. And if he's more consistent in the fall, the defense takes another step. The Vols could make some noise in the SEC Eastern Division race. They play South Carolina, of course, September 26th on the SEC Network at 7:30 p.m. We are going to take another break, and we're going to continue on with the rankings and move on to other stuff right after this GSMC.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
We're back, GSMC college football fans, nation, people, my good brothers and sisters of the college football fandom. We're back and we're talking about rankings. We just went through the first 14. Now we're about to get through the rest, the last 10, and then move on to some more interesting topics. So, number 15, North Carolina Tar Heels are ready to go. Retirement obviously wasn't for Mac Brown, who returned to his old digs after a year ago in Chapel Hill and led North Carolina to a 7-win season. Tar Heels also lost to Clemson by a point and were close to picking up a few more wins. They returned 10 starters on offense, including quarterback Sam Howell. As a freshman a year ago, Howell threw for 38 touchdowns, the most ever for an FBS true freshman. And on defense, former quarterback Chaz Surratt leads the way as linebacker, and he also helps that the UNC doesn't play Clemson in the regular season this year. So they're up against Syracuse on Saturday on the ACC network. Number 16 is TCU. So not only has Gary Patterson's been one of the best coaches in college football, he has been especially adept at when it comes to bouncing back. TCU went 5-7 a year ago. And last time the Horned Frogs had a losing season. Prior to that, 2016, they won 11 games the next year. TCU was victimized by close losses last season. 6 of their 7 losses were by a single score, with quarterback Max Dugan's status for the season unclear because of a heart abnormality. The Frogs will again have to lean heavily on their defense, and linebacker Garrett Wallow and safety Trayvon Moehrig are both future pros ready to go. So they play Iowa State September 26th, and that is to be announced because we really don't know. Number 17 on the list is the Kentucky Wildcats. So the Wildcats have finished 500 or better 3 of the past 4 years since in SEC play, and a testament to the job that Mark Stoops has done in Lexington. Their 2020 defense has a chance to be one of his best, led by linebackers DeAndre Square and Jamar Boogie Watson and massive nose guard Quentin Bohanna, who is 6'4", 357. Huge. And this may be Stoops' deepest team that he's ever had, with 20 starters returning. Most of Kentucky's success will hinge on generating more productive passing games. Quarterback Terry Wilson is back from a season-ending knee injury that he suffered in the second game a year ago. So they play Auburn September 26th at noon on the SEC network. Number 18 is UCF. So the Knights would have been ranked even higher if it not for the been a rash of players opting out during the season over COVID-19 concerns. Projected starters Tay Gawan and cornerback Kalia Davis at defensive tackle were among 10 players announcing that they would not play this season, among backup quarterback Darryl Mack Jr., and even so quarterback Dylan Gabriel is back after passing for 3,653 yards and 29 touchdowns last year, and UCF will make a strong push for the 4th straight season of 10 or more wins. They play Georgia Tech September 19th, 3:30 p.m. on ESPN. Number 19, our first 1-0 guy, Memphis. So the Tigers were dealt a blow last week when returning star running back Kenneth Gainwell decided to opt out of the season after seeing his family hit hard by the coronavirus pandemic. But the Tigers are still looked strong Saturday night in their opener with a 37-24 win against Arkansas State at home. And quarterback Brady White tossed for 4 touchdown passes, including 2 to Sean Dykes. And Memphis has won 13 of their past 15 games dating back to last season. They play Houston up next, September 18th, on ESPN. Number 20 is Appalachian State, the Mountaineers. So the Mountaineers have sights set for the 3rd consecutive outright Sun Belt Conference title, and with a 3rd different head coach. Sean Clark takes over the head coaching reins this time around for Eli Drinkwitz, who left for Arkansas head coaching job, and it helps that Clark has been part of the program as offensive line coach. The Mountaineers get quarterback Zach Thomas back for the 3rd season as a starter, which eases the loss of star running back Darrington Evans to the NFL. Appalachian State lost several of its top tacklers a year ago, but junior Sean Jolly is one of the more underrated cornerbacks in the country. They play Charlotte Saturday at noon on ESPN2. Baylor is number 21. So Matt Rule worked wonders at Baylor, and the Bears were 1 win away from making the college football playoff last season. But Rule is now in the NFL, and former LSU defensive coordinator Dan Arnada is the new coach at Baylor. So Arnada hired Larry Fedora as his offensive coordinator, and Fedora inherits senior Charlie Brewer as his quarterback. This will be Brewer's 4th year as a starter after throwing more than 3,000 yards each of his past 2 seasons. 9 starters are gone from the best defense in the Big 12 last season. But when has Arnada not figured out a way to put a good defense on the field? I can't answer because he's always found out. They play Louisiana Tech Saturday at noon on Fox. So Louisville is number 22. The Cardinals averaged 33 points per game a year ago in Scott Sanderfield's first season as a head coach, and it should be even better on offense in 2020. Quarterback Mikal Cunningham was one of college football's top breakout players last season, accounting for 28 touchdowns. He has one of the most electrifying players in the country returning at junior receiver Tutu Atwell, and the Cardinals' running game is equally potent with Javon Hawkins, who rushed for a school record 1,525 yards last season as a redshirt freshman. For all of the Cardinals' firepower and offense, though, the run defense will need to improve dramatically if they want to surpass their 8 wins from a year ago. They play Western Kentucky September 12th, 8 p.m. on the ACC network. Florida State is 23, so imagine telling somebody 5 years ago that Florida State would be 3 straight seasons without winning more than 7 games. Hard enough to believe the Seminoles last won more than 7 games in 2016, and Mike Norvell will be their third different coach since 2017. FSU needs a big year from redshirt junior quarterback James Blackman, who will look often for Tamorion Terry, who averaged 19.8 yards per catch and pulled in 9 touchdown catches a year ago. The defense, led by All-American tackle Marvin Wilson, will also add several key transfers. So they play Georgia Tech Saturday at 3:30 p.m. at ABC. Number 24 is Kansas State, the Wildcats. So the big splash a year ago for Chris Kleiman was his first season with Kansas State's coach, was leading the Wildcats to an upset of Oklahoma. In a year 2, he's hoping that K-State can find a little better or can finish a little better after losing 3 of his last 5 games last season. So nobody is suggesting the Wildcats are ready to contend for a Big 12 title, but they did win 8 games a year ago, and it's nice to have a veteran quarterback in Skylar Thompson returning, and kickoff return wizard Joshua Youngblood should be more of a threat on the offense this season. And number 25 is the Miami Hurricanes. So it took a hit on defense this summer with star defensive end and future first-round NFL draft pick Gregory Rousseau opting out for the season and landing Temple's graduate transfer Quincy Roach should help soften the blow. Roach had 13 sacks last season, and ultimately much of the burden will fall on Houston transfer quarterback Derek King to pump some life into Miami's offense that scored 21 or fewer points 7 times a year ago. They play UAB on Thursday, 8 p.m. ACC network time. So that is your top 25 so far that we're going to be looking at. And I can't wait to go through and basically dive into just how much things are going to move and shake and change. So to continue on this conversation, let's talk about the 5 things we've learned from week 1 for the 2020 season. So in the fourth quarter of Saturday afternoon's 42-0 win against Middle Tennessee State, Army finished with a 19-play, 99-yard touchdown drive that took 12 minutes, 26 seconds. In all, the Black Knights attempted 2 passes and ran the ball 64 times, with 7 players rushing somewhere between 28 and 91 yards. College football is back. All that's different is no fans, quiet whistles, face mask, and more face masks in fewer games, period. So under normal circumstances, week 1 in 2020 would have featured just about every team in the 130-member bowl subdivision. Instead, the first full Saturday of the season just had 6 games, and half of which included opponents from the FBS. So of the teams in action, only Memphis received votes for the preseason Amway Coaches Poll. And as a gauge on how the season will play out, Saturday's slate provided the first real glimpse at football amid a pandemic, but won't help settle arguments over which teams will reach the college football playoff. So here's some things to keep in mind. So the games are different in a sort of there are different sort of spectacles. So the stands aren't completely empty. Memphis had about 4,500 fans in attendance on Saturday night. And while earlier games at Marshall and Army featured similarly capped crowds, Army's attendance consisted entirely of 4,300 cadets spread out through Mitchie Stadium. Still, the backdrop stood in contrast to the pomp of a normal college football Saturday. Coaches were masked. Players stood along longer stretches of the sideline thanks to an NCAA rule change that allowed teams to stand from one 15-yard line to the other. So even the whistles are different. So replace due to concerns of your standard referee whistle with spray droplets Instead, they used electronic whistles attached to their waist, and it was difficult to hear even with limited crowd noise. So, unfortunately, the inability to hear the blast of a referee whistle isn't just an annoyance, but it's a potential safety issue, as some players may hear the whistle and stop while others continue as if the play has been blown dead. And it's something to watch during a larger list of games next weekend. So we know Memphis won Saturday, and it was one of the biggest games during the week. So Arkansas State is probably going to end up again being one of the best teams in the Sun Belt Conference, and what makes the Red Wolves a good bar meter to measure Memphis as a contender. They're led by Brady White, the quarterback, who had 4 touchdowns last game, and the Tigers beat Arkansas State 37-24 in the debut for Coach Ryan Silverfield and the former offensive line assistant who replaced new Florida State coach Mike Norvell. So Memphis joins UCF and Cincinnati atop the AAC, with the conference champion the heavy favorite to reach the January Bowl. So here are some takeaways from SMU beating Texas State. So for SMU, last September's 47-17 win against Texas State was one of 8 in a row to start the year, and one of 10 overall in a breakthrough season under Coach Sonny Dykes. And anxiety-inducing in comparison, Saturday's game and road win against the Bobcats might set off early alarms about Mustangs' odds of approaching last season's year of success. Texas State is definitely better. The Bobcats seem to have found a running game after ranking at the bottom of the Sun Belt and near a cellar of FBS last season, gaining 189 yards on 38 carries after only once topping 155 in one game last in 2019. So like most teams, we'll see through much of September, SSU's timing and general execution suffered from the inability to conduct a normal offseason, and still quarterback Shane Buechele completed 26 of 36 attempts and 367 yards and a touchdown, showing why he might be the top returning starter in the American Conference. So like we talked about a bit earlier, it might be really tough to prepare for a team like Army, so defensive coordinators groan at the thought of quickly preparing for games against the triple option offense used by Army and Navy. Normally, teams would much rather face one of the service academies in an opener, since it would give the defense several weeks to slowly get a sense of the offensive scheme. The flow of this offseason has most teams playing catch-up all August, and Army had run a similar system for years, could benefit the Black Knights all season. Army's effectiveness on offense against Middle Tennessee could be a sign of what's to come on Monday night when Navy hosts Brigham Young in one of the year's top non-conference games, BYU's next opponent after midshipmen. So that would be Army on September 19th. So here's an early preview that we're going to have for Conference USA coming right up after this break. GSMC.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's GSMCpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, GSMC College Football Nation, we're about to get right back into it for our last segment of the morning, evening, afternoon, or night, whenever you're listening to this, man. It's a Monday, and by the time you're hearing this, we'll probably have a game going on. Army versus BYU. That's going to be a big time game, and people are going to be excited. It's going to be watched by many, and I'm sure tweeted by many, so get your Twitter fingers ready. But here is an early preview of Conference USA. So With 4 Conference USA teams in action, Middle Tennessee, Marshall, North Texas, and UTEP, Saturday gave a deeper view of the Group of 5 conference. And the conference favorite, UAB, won 45-35 against Central Arkansas on Thursday night. And of this group, UTEP has been pegged as one of the weaker teams in the FBS, while North Texas looks to improve on last year's 4-win finish, while replacing one of the most prolific passers in school history in Mason Fine. In matchups against the FCS, North Texas beat Houston Baptist 57-31, and UTEP topped Stephen F. A 24-14. Marshall looked the part of an East Division contender with 59-0 win against Eastern Kentucky. Freshman quarterback Grant Wells set a new program record for passing yards with 307 and tied the program record for touchdowns with 4 and tossed by a quarterback in his debut start. So those are basically your 5 top things that we saw last Saturday and basically last week of football. So a lot of teams from the Group of 5, a lot of smaller schools basically kind of showcasing what they have to offer, and also a lot of schools that may show some promise later on down the line, like Memphis or even Army, if teams can't really adjust to defending a triple option, because that triple option was definitely making some things happen last week that I don't think many teams were prepped for very often, because let's be honest, who runs the triple option anymore? Like they're like the only 2, Army and Navy are the only 2 that really traditionally run it. I remember Georgia Tech used to do it all the time, but of course things change as the times go and with your coach. So triple option is not really something ran too often anymore. Now, option offenses or quarterback runs are still very prevalent in college football. They even seep their way into the NFL at times, but it's not always as much as you think it is. And triple option, honestly, is just a lot of work. You really need to be good at reading. And at the end of the day, one bad read is really going to kill the drive. So you have to be almost perfect in a triple option offense. And that's really hard to do when you're asking a lot of people who start quarterbacks as early as their first month on campus. But what do we expect to see for this incoming football season? So let's look at week 2, right? So week 2, we have some UAB versus Florida. So that right there is going to be a pretty interesting game to see. I said Florida. UAB versus Miami. That's going to be interesting to see, because Miami is going to have to rack up some wins often and early this year in order to really make some moves in the ACC, because right now they're kind of being disrespected. They lost one of their better players to an opt-out for COVID-19, like most teams have in some respect. But you know, Miami is not some barn burner team with a lot of talent. They have people, but they're going to have to win the games that matter most and really pull some games underneath some people in order to make some noise. So they're a team that's going to be definitely interesting to watch. I'd say for this Saturday coming up, the games that I'm going to particularly pay attention to, I want to see what UNC has to offer against Syracuse. I'm definitely going to tune into them. I believe that Notre Dame's game against Duke is going to be really telling. And, of course, I think it'd be an interesting game to see Clemson, because we know how they started last year. And that is something that you always have to pay attention to. So, last year's start, they're a little bit weird. You know, they weren't the best. And all things considered, they worked their way back into season shape, back into championship contender shape near the back end. And a lot of people are like, ooh, this doesn't look good. I mean, Clemson's going to be in the top 4, but how good are they? And eventually they prove that, you know, they're still pretty good, right? Clemson is still one of the better teams in the conference, or in the nation, I should say. They are the best team in their conference by far. And they are going to make another run at this thing. We don't know how well it's going to be, but considering they have Travis Etienne and they still have Trevor Lawrence at the helm, they're going to be pretty good. And their defense for the past 5 years have been pretty good. Another game I'd say that has to be of some interest to see what the Longhorns are able to do with UTEP, man. And I don't mean this as in I'm thinking UTEP is in for an upset. I just need to see what Texas has to offer us, because if they don't look good against UTEP, there's going to be a lot of question marks coming from those Texas donors, and it's going to get ugly. So, UNC versus Syracuse is going to be a big time game. I want to see what Howell is able to do in the passing. Like, he's got a lot of hype, right? He has all the big stats. Pro Football Focus is all over him. And to be honest, they're one of the teams in the ACC that's really going to be capable of going toe-to-toe with Clemson, considering they only lost to Clemson by a point last year. And I think they're going to be a lot better. As most people believe, they're going to be a lot better. They have a lot of returning starters and a lot of great offensive and defensive players across the board. So I'm expecting them to take care of business versus Syracuse, but I just want to see how fluid they look on offense. And I know defense is going to be a thing that people grow into this year, because defense is always hard and it never really gets any easier when you don't have a lot of time to prepare. So defenses already get kind of sloppy in the beginning, and with a COVID-riddled season, it's going to get even worse. But Notre Dame is interesting because they're playing a 10-game conference schedule in the ACC. So they are going to be in a bigger spotlight. They're going to have competition that is basically consistent across the board, I would feel like. And it stinks that they don't get to play their games that are traditional and people excited for, but this is the next best thing. We have a dinner date with Notre Dame if you're an ACC fan. So that's pretty cool. And that just means that your school will have one extra game that's going to be basically kind of historical. So if you're a Duke fan, take this moment and be like, wow, our team played Notre Dame at one point and it wasn't weird, right? It wasn't like it was a natural choice to be there. So what can you really say? I think one of the bigger things going across the board, all FBS schools, is the quarterback play. As seen in previous games last Saturday, if your quarterback play is sloppy, you are going to have a bad time. And I mean, this isn't some breathtaking take. I'm not breaking news here. Like, this is pretty apparent. If your quarterback play stinks, you are not going to be good. But in this year, really, really, especially this year, quarterback play is going to be paramount. You're going to have to make good decisions. You're going to have to be able to read defenses and make the smart play. There were plenty of times where I would see a game, like in Texas State game, their quarterback had a drag route that they just decided to say, I'm not throwing that, and threw it deep inside the end zone. And granted, they didn't have all that much time. It was third down. But to be fair, there was nobody around. That drag route, he could have made a play and picked up some yards, took it out of bounds, and they still would have ended up kicking the field goal anyway. And I think there's been some tough reads going on with some of these quarterbacks. So it's going to be a big testament to how this coaching staff, the offensive coordinators, and the quarterback coaches can really get these quarterbacks back in game shape and showing them the keys to be successful this year, because it's not just going to be about momentum, because momentum can only get you so far once you start facing some of those juggernaut teams and those teams that give everybody problems. And once everybody's defenses get back in order, then we're going to get into the nitty gritty of some things. We're going to start seeing just who is really about it and just who is really pretending. And so far, I think Memphis got a good win, and I think that means something. I think Army's win is cool. Middle Tennessee State is in a flux of trouble, and it's not going to be pretty over there for some time. I sometimes browse the college football subreddit on Reddit, and I saw a lot of people with flares in Middle Tennessee State feeling lots of pain. And if there's one thing I can relate to about sports, is feeling sports pain. So I feel for those guys. It'll get better one day. I promise you. It'll get better one day. The Southern Miss versus South Alabama game was really fun, particularly because of it just seemed like an old-fashioned Southern team versus Southern team that sort of don't like each other and they want to win really badly. Now, of course, the game didn't end up being super close, but there's a lot of things. Like, you saw a lot of bad quarterback play, you saw a lot of blown coverages, you saw a lot of missed tackles, and you saw some missed field goals. Now, let me take a second here. Well, I don't know what it is about the bottom tiers of the FBS and such, but I promise you, you would think field goal kicking has to be one of the more difficult things to do, because the amount of kicks that you just saw shanked last weekend was just ridiculous. Like, I'm pretty sure Middle Tennessee State versus Army had a lot of bad kicks. SMU versus Texas State has some really bad field goals too. And of course, it's really discouraging to see when you think about just how bad people rave or like get on kickers at higher levels of play. So like, people will not tolerate somebody on Alabama or Clemson missing field goals. You're supposed to get the easy points when you can get them, and that's supposed to be easy. And then you come down to the lower levels and you're like, wow, it can get that bad, right? Like, the field goals can get that much worse than it already is. So I think we take field goal kickers for granted at higher levels of play. And I'm not saying that to sit here and say that field goal kickers should not take some sort of responsibility when they miss kicks. But, you know, sometimes we get on field goal kickers for missing from like 55 yards. And I'm like, you know what? That's pretty hard to get right. And there's a lot of things that come into account when it comes to missing field goals. Like, was the snap good? Or was the wind going? Or was it pulled left or pulled right or something? Or like, there was like a bad timing issue. A lot of things that can go awry in the kicking game. But last Saturday's kicking game was some of the worst I've collectively seen among teams. Like, it was just all over the place. So shout out to all the kickers that find a way to get it done and have thick skin, because not everybody can do that job. And you have a lot of pressure on your shoulders because people just expect you to be automatic because they think that it's your only job. And to some degree, they do have a point. It is kickers' only job to kick the football, but also, let's be prepared to also note that it's not easy when you don't get a chance to practice all the time. And there's also times where, you know, you just get psyched out. And maybe sometimes not having a crowd might affect kickers in a different way than we ever even thought of, right? I would think so. So that's definitely going to be something to keep, you know, watch over. Just how are the kickers doing? Everybody talks about the quarterbacks. Everybody talks about the wide receiver talent, the defensive lines. Check in on the kickers, man. How are the kickers going to handle this? How are the kickers going to deal with smaller fan sizes or crowd noise being pumped in or no crowds at all? You know, how are kickers going to handle this? That's the biggest thing I want to see. Not really, but it's definitely on the list now. What are kickers going to do? How are they going to handle all this? Is going to be a lot tougher. But with that said, that's going to be the GSMC College Football Podcast for this afternoon, evening, morning, or night. I'd like to thank you all for checking in and listening to us week in and week out. It's been really fun doing this every week, and I love talking about it. And I encourage you all to like, subscribe, or rate the podcast if you like it or if you don't. You know, every comment helps us get better over here at the GSMC. And don't forget to follow us on our social media, Facebook and Twitter, GSMC College Football. We can't wait, man, to get back into it. Next week is going to be a big week, so stay tuned and get ready because we're coming. GSMC College Football Podcast. This is Ethan signing out. I'll see you all next Monday.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmc.com. GSMCpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type in GSMC to find all of our shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From football to basketball, baseball to MMA, and even soccer. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast.